for all. We can show honor to the native keepers of the land by recognizing the value of their culture, by learning the truth of their history and how it shaped this great country. Today, we have with us an amazing speaker. I am so excited. It is our September Learning Cafe, which is why disability inclusion matters. For these perspectives on ableism, accessibility, and intersectionality. Today, our guest speaker will engage us in a foundational presentation on why disability inclusion is important. She will discuss her personal journey with a disability, ableism, intersectionality, key disability awareness concepts, the case for disability inclusion, and how you can make a difference. We encourage you to drop questions in the Q&A box, and our presenter will answer as many as possible at the end. And we do encourage you to use the chat box respectfully. So a little bit about our speaker. Many of you had an opportunity to read the information. That's why you signed up for this amazing presentation. Catarina Rivera is a public speaker, diversity, equity, inclusion consultant with over 14 years of experience in the public sector. Catarina has worn hearing aids from a young age and was diagnosed with progressive vision loss at 17 years old. She also has a BA from Duke University and an MSEd from Bank Street College of Education and an MPH from Hunter College. She is a certified professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. She is a member of the RespectAbility's National Disability Speakers Bureau and KeyNote Women's Global Speakers Directory. Catarina is committed to social justice. So let's give a warm virtual welcome to Catarina Rivera. Catarina.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to today's presentation and being with all of you. My goal is definitely to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So let's get right to it. We're talking today about why disability inclusion matters. We will also be talking about ableism, accessibility, and intersectionality as a part of our conversation.
Sorry to interrupt, but the interpreter disappeared for the client. Can you pause for a moment while we figure out how to get me back on screen for the client? Sorry about that. Okay, we're good. You can go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So today we're going to grow in awareness about disability overall, including the definition of disability. You will learn what ableism is and the role it plays. We'll also learn what intersectionality means and how it shows up. You'll learn why disability inclusion is important. And I hope by the end of this, you'll identify one clear action that you can take right away to be more inclusive. I invite all of you to be present. I know it's very hard in a virtual setting. So whatever you need to do, keeping your camera off, making sure you have water, moving your body, try your best to be present so that you can get the most out of our time together. So I'll start always here with a visual description. I'm a light-skinned Latina woman with dark brown hair pulled back in a bun. I'm wearing glasses with a dark brown frame. I have on silver hoop earrings and a red shirt with short sleeves. Behind me is a virtual background with the Blindish Latina logo repeated multiple times in columns and rows. The logo has a bold black eye and the words @Blindish Latina written in all caps in black below. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And this presentation for land acknowledgement was created on the traditional stolen lands of the Piscataway and Acconchan or Anacostan people. My perspective is my perspective alone. I do not represent all disabled people, all Latina people, all women. It would be impossible for me to do that. Let's start with my story. What I want to share with you is that I was born disabled, but I didn't know it at the beginning. My mother was Cuban, and she immigrated to the United States when she was 8 years old. This is a photo of me looking lovingly at my mom and my little brother. My father was Puerto Rican, and this is a picture of me sitting on his lap as a toddler. But he's a special kind of Puerto Rican because he's from the Bronx, so he's New Yorican. His parents were from Puerto Rico. So you have its history of immigration in my family. When I was young, my parents realized that I was having some trouble hearing them. They got my hearing tested, and I was found to have a hearing disability. And so at that time, in the 80s, it was very, very common for people like me to be pushed into the hearing only world. I was given hearing aids, speech therapy, and oral language. So I never got exposed to the deaf community. I never got exposed to deaf culture. And as an adult, just 2 years ago, I took my first ASL course. And that was really important to me personally because I didn't have that connection growing up. There was, it's not that I fault anybody. I think it was the predominant way of the time, but I'm hopeful that children today are being exposed to deaf culture and are not taught that the only way to this as a deaf or hard of hearing person is to use oral language. This is a photo of me and my younger brother. I got very used to being hard of hearing. It wasn't a problem for me. I adapted. I got support in school as I needed it. So when I was headed off to college, I was feeling pretty good. I was feeling like I had everything together. This photo shows me when I was 17 years old. I was at a pinnacle in my life. I was ready for college. I was ready to go to Duke University. I had a scholarship. I was getting a black belt in martial arts that summer. It was such a high point in my life. And that's exactly when I found out about my vision disability, because I went to karate camp and all of us were in the woods. All my friends went outside at night and started running around, trying to play pranks. I went outside and couldn't move at all. I could not see. In that moment, I saw such a stark difference between me and them and realized that something was going on with me. That's how it came to be that I got diagnosed with Usher syndrome. And what Usher syndrome is a deterioration of the retina over time. So first thing to go is night vision. So that's why I had night blindness as an adolescent. As you get older, what happens is your visual field narrows. And right now I have vision in this little box and I'm in my late 30s. So going back to 17-year-old Catarina, this was hard. This was unexpected. My family didn't know anything about Usher syndrome. It was quite an adjustment. And that's where I began my part 2 of my disability journey. I didn't want to talk about my disability. I didn't want to tell anybody that I had a vision disability, or at that time, what I called it, I would tell it. People, if I did talk about it, I would say, I'm going blind. And I would cry, and it was very emotional. But as I grew up, as I went out into the world, I moved to New York City. I started to get services. I came on a journey to accept my disability and how I existed. This photo shows me much happier as a disabled person, showing off my hearing aids. And that's not something that I would have done when I was younger. After many years, the other big shift that I made was I started using a white cane for blindness. that was huge. There are many blind people who could benefit from using a cane who don't, because of the way the world treats them, because they've seen people get accused of faking their blindness, because they're scared. And I understand completely with those feelings. When I first started using a cane, I didn't want anyone in my neighborhood to see me using it. I didn't want them to, I just didn't want to show up one day with a cane and people to not understand why I now had a white cane. But in the process of learning how to use one and seeing the benefit that it had on my life, how I could be independent, I came to love it. And I didn't then have a problem with the opinions of others, but that took a long time to get to. Once I reached that place of complete pride and self-advocacy, where I started speaking up for all of my needs, because now I was publicly disabled and I owned it, that's what led me to become a public speaker and DEI consultant. I know that there are so many people that are at different places in their disability journey, and we need to make the world more inclusive for that. So why not me? Why not my voice? And especially bringing all of my identities to the conversation. So before we go into the teaching, I would love to just invite you to reflect. We are not going to spend 4 minutes on this. It will be 2 minutes in the interest of time, but I would love to see, growing up, did you know anyone who was disabled? What was your relationship like with them? What were you taught about disability by your family, school, friends, and society? If you yourself grew up disabled, how were you treated? What were you taught about disability by your family, school, friends, and society? I'm going to be quiet for those 2 minutes. I ask you not to share in the chat until the time is up. Please wait to share. You can type in the chat, just don't hit send, because that helps everyone who needs time to think and process. So I'm going to begin the time now. Ten more seconds. Okay. What emerged for you? We're just going to do chat sharing in the interest of time, but when I do this as a workshop, a 90-minute workshop, we usually offer the opportunity to share verbally as well. So many wonderful reflections. Thank you all for sharing. I'm seeing that some of you have family members who were disabled. I'm seeing some people had examples where disabled people were treated exactly the same as anybody else and were included. Mhm. Okay, thank you for sharing about your learning disability. I'm seeing a sharing here. Microaggressions related to being hard of hearing. Mm. Mhm. Mm. Okay, this is amazing. I hope that we can come back to these sharings. And the whole intention behind this is to bring in our context. We all have something that we've learned about disability, whether your experience was that someone in your life was disabled and they were valued, they were included, whether you had an experience where disability wasn't talked about. Maybe you knew someone, like people have shared here, but it wasn't a transparent conversation. Somebody shared that they didn't get a diagnosis and how that impacted them in their schooling. So all of these experiences are rich and valuable. And they also mirror what happens in society when it comes to disability. I wish I could respond personally to each one, but at this moment, we won't be able to get into that. But I encourage you to keep reading everyone's wonderful stories. Let's acknowledge that many people are uncomfortable when discussing disability. Disability is not a bad word. When we avoid saying the word disability, we communicate the message that it's negative, that it shouldn't be talked about, and that's absolutely not true. There's nothing wrong with having a disability. It's not something to be ashamed of or ashamed of talking about. And that's where I want to start. But did you know 1 in 4 adults in the United States are disabled? This is according to the CDC. I strongly believe this is an undercount, that as it stands, 1 in 4. 46% of people aged 60 or over are disabled worldwide. As we age, disability is a part of life. 30% of college-educated employees aged 21 to 65 are disabled. And this is in white-collar roles, I believe. There are a lot of employees in our workforce that are disabled. However, only 3.5% of series regular characters on broadcast scripted series are disabled. When you look at disability and entertainment, we have so many problems. Disabled people are often only in 2 types of storylines: tragedy or inspiration. And they exist mainly to be reacted to. They are not the main characters. They're not the ones with complexity, with love lives, with growth. This is a real problem. Now we start with intersectionality. I want everyone to remember that anyone can be disabled or become disabled at any time. Any other identity can intersect with disability, whether that's religion, race, age, veteran status, socioeconomic status, family structure, anything. So this is really important to remember. Disability is part of the natural diversity of humankind. I love saying this. I say this in all my keynotes because we are all different as humans. And unfortunately, disability has been part of eugenics often, of conversations of where it's about eliminating disability. And this is not right. We are valuable, we are worthy just as we are. Our disabilities are important parts of our identity. I have become a different person as, with my disability there. It has influenced me, but everyone's relationship to their identity is different. What I want to communicate here is that disability is just part of being human, and it should be seen that way. So what do I think everyone needs to know about disability? I'm going to go through some basic awareness principles here, and I'll try to go as quickly as possible because there is a lot of content about this. So we already did this. I'm comfortable. Let's talk about what a disability is. A disability, according to the CDC, is any condition of the body or mind, an impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities, an activity limitation, and interact with the world around them, a participation restriction. According to the ADA, it is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This is a narrower definition than the CDC's because the ADA is more concerned with who's getting accommodations, kind of this qualifier. So it's not as broad. Models of disability. This is very important, and I hope that everyone takes this away from today. When we talk about models of disability, it's a worldview or philosophy, how disability is viewed through a certain lens. So the medical model is a very dominant model when it comes to disability. It says that disabled people have a problem that needs to be fixed, and the medical community has the answers. They are the experts, they are the ones with power, and they're focused on treatment or cure. Many disabled people come to find out that they are disabled through a medical diagnosis. Oftentimes, the stories that I hear are that nothing was provided for them about how to live with their disability, resources, community. That's just not a part of the medical model. The medical model is all about fixing it, eliminating it, curing it. The charity model is a little different. If you've seen a telethon, I'm sure you'll recognize the charity model. It says disabled people should be pitied. The poor disabled people need us to do something for them. We, the charity actors, are benevolent. We are amazing. We're the saviors of the poor disabled people. So the narratives that fit in the charity model about disability are that someone's disability, their disabled life is awful. It's another one of getting rid of the disability or addressing it. And that is a very harmful model. Both of those are very powerful, and we see the message of often. The social model of disability is a model that I love because it is empowering. The people who have the power here are the disabled people. We, in the social model, there's nothing wrong with us. There's something wrong with our world. We are focused on creating inclusion in our world and accessibility, and that's what we need. My disability would be less challenging if there were ramps everywhere, if there were curb cuts everywhere, if the elevators were clearly labeled, whatever it is. This is the model that I love to talk about and act under. So if you don't know about the social model, spend some time learning about it. It's also all about community and collective power. Okay, types of disability. Remember that disabilities can be permanent, like mine, temporary, like breaking an arm or a leg, situational. So if you're non-disabled and you enter a restaurant with a friend of yours, say the restaurant is very loud and you can't hear your friend. A tool that I use as a hard of hearing person could benefit you in this situation, such as an app that transcribes the conversation. But once you're out of that situation, you don't need it. A disability can also be undiagnosed. I know many people who were diagnosed with disabilities later in life, especially with disabilities like learning disabilities, autism, ADHD. I hear these stories often. And what that means is the person had the disability. They just didn't have the diagnosis. So it was still affecting them at work, at school, in their family, and their social relationships. So anyone around you that you're interacting with might have a disability and just not know it, or they might not have been able to access a diagnosis because of lack of access to healthcare or to a specialist. There is privilege with accessing a diagnosis, especially for conditions that require a lot of testing. A disability can be acquired or from birth, and someone can have multiple disabilities as well, very common. I know people who have physical disabilities and they have a mental health condition. So let's not forget that. There are many different types of disabilities. Here's one categorization that I find helpful. Mental health, physical, hearing, visual, learning, cognitive, developmental. This helps us remember there are so many different types of disabilities. A word here on the term able-bodied versus non-disabled. I use non-disabled to talk about a person without a disability. Able-bodied is often used and heard. The reason I don't use able-bodied is because it focuses on body. And I know that so many disabilities reside in the mind and are not in the body. So I feel that non-disabled is more inclusive. There are other advocates who prefer non-disabled, but it's, whatever someone's using, that means someone who doesn't have a disability. So in the chat box, let's get a few examples of disabilities. And I would love to see it range across the categories. Let's not all name physical disabilities. Let's have a range. So let's get a few suggestions in the chat. Okay, dyslexia. Yes, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I have a lot of favorite content creators that have EDS, ADHD, autism, developmental, Asperger's, autism, social anxiety, ASD, gender dysphoria, anxiety, depression, ODD, ADHD, OCD, fibromyalgia, debilitating shyness. I would have to go and see if there is a term for that, because I'm not familiar with that being a term for a disability. Thank you. Autoimmunes, yes, there are many autoimmune conditions. PTSD, APD, I do not know what APD is, I'm thinking now. MS, autism, okay, yes, speech disabilities, CVI, arthritis. Some forms of tinnitus could be included. It is possible. Severe allergies, TBI, okay, traumatic brain injury, I know that one. Fine gross motor disabilities, cerebral palsy. We have so many examples. I'm reading and I see at the bottom there's 22 more. So I'm just gonna give you all like a round of applause. Many, many disabilities, digestive disabilities, yes, IBS, Crohn's, Lyme. Pregnancy as an example of temporary disability, exactly. Spina bifida, Alzheimer's. Okay, we got it. Yes. MS, impact of stroke, celiac, so many here. Thank you all for giving these examples. So I hope you saw something new that you don't know about in the chat, and you can just kind of make a note to learn about that disability. There are many, many that exist. Thank you for participating. I wanted to give a few slides to neurodiversity, especially because it's really been, there's a lot of conversation about neurodiversity. Neurodiversity describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving, and differences are not viewed as deficits. Neurodiversity was first coined by autistic sociologist Judy Singer in the 1990s. Now, what are some examples? ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, auditory processing disorder, learning disabilities. These are just some examples. But I think it's really important to remember that there's a lot of different types of disabilities under neurodiversity, because sometimes people only think about autism. Disabilities are not always apparent or visible. I use the term apparent or non-apparent. And that's really important to remember. If I didn't have my cane and I was in a space somewhere and someone looked at me, they wouldn't think that I have a disability. Most people don't even notice my hearing aids. So if I bump into them, I've had people make assumptions that I wasn't looking, I wasn't paying attention, I'm rude, and I truly did not see them. And we make assumptions about other people all the time. There's a real lack of awareness of a disability experience. A few things I want to call out are chronic illness not being well understood. Chronic illness is dynamic. Symptoms vary from day to day. People might be using a wheelchair one day, a cane another day. They might feel well one day and go out. They might not be able to the next day. So oftentimes family and friends or people that they're interacting with don't understand that dynamic nature. There has been historically a lack of support for remote work for disabled people pre-pandemic. People have been requesting accommodations. Remote work is, for many people, can be very supportive. However, it took a pandemic and the fact that everyone was being affected to make remote work all of a sudden possible across every industry almost. So that was challenging for disabled people to see all of a sudden that willingness. Blindness as a spectrum is not well understood. I can use a cane and use my cell phone. I have central vision, but I don't see on the sides. I don't see it, well at night. I need my cane, but someone else is going to expect someone using a white cane to be totally blind. And that's not how blindness works. There's many different kinds of blindness as well. Ambulatory wheelchair users is another one. People, non-disabled people often assume that a wheelchair user is paralyzed, and that's not always the case. It's not the only reason that someone is a wheelchair user. There are people that can walk, and for different reasons, a wheelchair is what they need. They might not be able to walk long distances, for example. They might have weakness. There are many different reasons. So if someone can move their legs in their wheelchair, they're not faking it. And that's across disability. I don't know why this happens, but there is this accusation of faking it that seems to be very popular, especially in like online circles. It's very damaging. Let's talk about language for how to say to someone has a disability. So there's person first language, person with a disability. You put the word person first. Identity first language, disabled person. That's the identity in first position. There is historical context here. In the past, person with a disability, person first language was prioritized, was promoted, because disabled people were not treated as people. In the 50s, 60s, before the ADA was passed, a disabled person could be excluded from school, from education, from receiving the same education as others. And were often kept out of society. Parents were often suggested to institutionalize their children. And so personhood, emphasizing personhood, was critical for advocates. In this current moment, many advocates prefer identity first language, disabled person. And we've really been led by the autistic community in this, where the strong message has been, we don't want to say person with autism. I'm an autistic person. And so what I will say to you is that both of these terms are respectful. So when you interact with someone, find out how they self-identify. But when you're doing external communications or you want to talk about disability, both of these ways are respectful to the community. I do not advise for use of these terms, though. Handy-capable, differently abled are euphemisms for disability. They do not come from us. Crippled, handicapped, impaired. These words were common in the past and are usually really seen as offensive now, out of date. However, members of the disability community have reclaimed terms, just like any other identity group. If we want to reclaim a word, that's something that we can do, but we are the ones who can use it. So that's why you see Netflix documentary Crip Camp. That comes from the word crippled, is shortened to crip. I see that often online. People use it in their Instagram handles. That is up to the disabled person if they want to reclaim terminology like this. Special needs, very commonly used, but the reason that there's advocacy against this term is because our needs are just needs. They're not special. Like, what makes it special? There's this kind of infantilization, I think, that was connoted with this term as well. So those are the ones that I advise against. Like I said earlier, always respect how someone self-identifies. This happens to me as well. There are some disabled people who they identify with differently abled. That's what they've chosen. So I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm going to accept how they identify. Oh yes, I see something popping up. Advice against invalid. Yeah. Now let's get into ableism. We have so much to cover here. Ableism is everywhere in our world. It's the idea that non-disabled people are more worthy and valuable than disabled people. It leads to discrimination, prejudice, bias. It's another harmful ism that we have to work against, and it leads to internalized ableism. Disabled people exist in the same world as everyone else. So if they don't see themselves as beautiful in advertisements, if they don't see their stories as mattering in TV and entertainment, they're going to internalize these negative ideas as well about themselves. So one common one that disabled people internalize is feeling like a burden, feeling like they don't want to inconvenience others with their requests. Someone spoke about this in the chat where they're not doing that anymore. They're hard of hearing. They were hearing aids and they said, they asked people to speak louder for them. And they're asking that and owning it. And there's a lot of dismantling of internalized ableism that happens along the way, hopefully on the disability journey. Here are some examples of ableism. Award shows without ramps to the stage. Like, what does that say about who's expected to win? Zoom closed captions were under a paywall for a long time. So there was deaf and hard of hearing people were just left out of meetings because Zoom didn't want to make it accessible for everyone. Team building activities with throwing and catching balls. I hated these because I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel part of my team. I was only focused on trying to catch a ball or sitting out and feeling like I wasn't part of the activity. Lack of representation in magazines, media, TV. We've talked about this. And here's an example of a social situation. My friends decided to do an escape room birthday party. And it was not accessible for me at all. All I did was walk from room to room with the group, trying not to bump into things. I couldn't understand. They were all shouting, touching things. And I was just trying not to bump into something and make it out. That was it. So let's get a few other examples. You're a very participatory group. I'm so grateful for this. I know we're going to have some great examples. Okay, any examples of ableism? I'm being told to turn my ear on when I can't hear someone is ableism. Yes, it is. Job postings listing oral communication skills as a requirement. Oh, thank you for sharing that. Let's get one or two more. Expectations of reading out loud. Yes. Accessibility as an afterthought when planning for live and or virtual meetings. Oh, yes. There have been so many times I have a meeting with someone and I have to teach them how to turn the closed captions on in Zoom and restart the meeting, or even when I request it, sometimes people show up when they say, oh, I couldn't figure it out. Saying that you don't look disabled as a compliment, right? And that's a microaggression. Okay, I saw someone else say the same. When people do not make the effort to accommodate, expect you to accommodate for them, right? Refusing to turn on captions and watching things because they're distracting. Oh, yes. Okay, some friends who refuse to support anxiety because they don't agree the situation is anxiety provoking. Wow. Okay, telling my son with ADHD and SPD to act normal. That is totally offensive. Okay, I'm just reading all of these. All of these are really powerful examples. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing them with a group and bringing yourself to this workshop. Let's talk about intersectionality. And here's my GIF or GIF, depending how you pronounce it. I've got a few of these on Giphy. That's what is intersectionality? It was coined in 1989 by scholar and writer Kimberly Crenshaw. Very important to give her credit. It is the interconnecting nature of social categorizations, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to an individual or a group. That creates overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. It's also a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. We have this definition, but we'll talk about it more concretely now. So as a quick example, everyone has many different identities. So here's one example: racial identity, gender, sexuality, disability, nationality, mentioned earlier, religion, veteran status, family structure, so many, like language. So we hold all of these identities. And for me, the three that I want to name here: I'm a woman, I'm Latina, I'm disabled. So the fact that I'm all three of these things means that in some situations, I have a harder time, or I'm at more of a disadvantage, or I have more oppression than other people. So let's talk about that. Personal examples. When I'm using a white cane at night, because I'm a woman, I'm already scared for my safety. Now, using a cane, I don't want someone to see me as a victim or to harass me. So I spend time learning the route that I'm going to walk before I go outside, so that I look like I know where I'm going and I don't have to stop. I get, anxiety about that. Speaking up in the workplace. I'm a woman, I have opinions. So if I speak up, I can be viewed negatively for that. The fact that I'm Latina, that can also be another layer of repression, of like, oh, you're too much, you're too loud. And then being disabled, if I'm speaking up about an access need, I might be the only voice on this. So I could be seen as a troublemaker. And all of these things connect. Also, now when you have, this is an example when you focus on one identity only, you're always going to leave some people out. So when I used to go to networking events for Latina, Latinx professionals in New York City, they were often held in loud, dark environments. I could not see, I could not connect well. I had many people assume that I was rude because they came up to me or nearby me and I didn't see or hear them. And so that was difficult for me in my experience. So there were challenges there. If they had planned that event with disability in mind to be more accessible, I would have had a much better experience. I would not have been left out. So why does intersectionality matter? We are complex individuals. A lot of work, unfortunately, focuses on only one identity. And if you ignore intersectionality, it can mean that progress that you do make might leave people behind and perpetuate inequities that already exist between different identities. So one thing that I'm reclaiming is my name. You may have heard me say Catarina earlier. When I say my name, I'm going to say it in Spanish. And that's something that I have done within my intersectionality. My identity matters to me and I want all parts of me to be seen. So another reminder that anyone can be disabled or become disabled at any time. So intersectionality is very important when it comes to disability. Now, I see the time and I'm very low on time. So there was just so much content about that I really wanted to bring. So I'm going to hope to wrap up in 3 to 4 minutes, and we'll take as many questions as we can in that time. Let's introduce disability inclusion now. So why is it important? Accessibility benefits everyone. Curb cuts benefit everyone. They were designed for wheelchair users, but if you're pulling a package, you're pulling a suitcase, you're pushing a stroller, you're elderly, you want to be safe, you're probably using a curb cut. So it helps everyone be safe. Closed captions benefit everyone. A lot of times people think it's just for the deaf and hard of hearing, but autistic people use it, people with auditory processing disorder, people with ADHD, people who are English language learners, who are tired, who are watching something in a noisy environment or on the train, they want to have the captions on. They benefit everyone. Clear pathways benefit everyone. This is such a simple example. At a previous workplace, I noticed that there were some very heavy like metal mail carts blocking the path, and I was concerned I was going to trip. So I asked the office services team to always keep those pathways clear and move the carts to the side. That didn't just benefit me as a blind person, that benefited everyone, because there are people who could have tripped on that, whether they were looking at their phone or talking to a colleague. It's dangerous for everyone. Accessibility and disability inclusion leads to a better customer experience or client experience and trust. It really helps when people feel that they have been thought of, that their experience has been validated, they haven't been left out. Accessibility also leads to greater innovation and profit. Oftentimes, when you're creating something you haven't thought about accessibility, you have one idea. But then when you bring accessibility in, like, oh, how can we do this? That leads you to innovate, that leads you to create something that's even better. And profit is just because I think you're reaching more people, your product is better at higher quality, and you're really able to include more users. So I think in general, we need to recognize the power of accessibility. So I'm going to skip that. 4 simple ways to be inclusive for employees and make them feel seen. Learn common disability microaggressions and avoid them. So I miss examples: touching mobility aids, helping without asking, don't touch someone without their permission, saying things like, I could never live with a disability, I don't know how you do it, I don't think of you as disabled. These are not compliments. Asking intrusive questions. People often feel entitled to someone's story when they're in public, they're a stranger. Like, that is not okay. You don't get to ask someone why they're using a mobility aid. And using ableist language, such as falls on deaf ears. There are so many terms that we should not be using, even the term crazy or lame. Respond appropriately to disability disclosure. When someone tells you they're disabled, they can be very nervous. That can be a big deal for them. So what could you say? Thank you for sharing. Thank them. Build that trust. You can say, I'd like to know more about this. I'm here to support you. However you need, let them lead and ask questions as appropriate. Caption everything everywhere. Always have the captions. Even if you're like creating a training video or something, is that video captioned? And design inclusive employee experiences. What can you do for that? You can ask about access needs. You can require accessibility plans, make it mandatory. Provide information in multiple ways, visual, ahead of time, reading. This is just important. Sending meeting agendas out ahead of time. Yes, image descriptions, alt text, all of this. Use the hand raising feature to moderate participation. There are just so many ways that you could make an experience accessible. I hope you'll continue to learn from disabled voices, that you'll make a commitment to care about disability, take action, focus on your sphere of influence. You can do something, you have power. Disability is not a bad word. Let's all adopt an intersectional lens. And remember that disability inclusion is important internally and externally. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I hope that you took something valuable from today's session. You can stay connected to me on Instagram at Blindish Latina, on LinkedIn, or on my website, CatarinaRivera.com. So let's take those questions.
Ooh. Oh my word, Catarina. I have pages and pages of notes of things I need to do, personally. But here are some questions. I am curious to know and understand the term empowerment and why we use that word when it can cause harm. Is there another term we can use instead of empowerment in the aspect of disability?
Okay, I will say that for empowerment, I think that I am entering that conversation recently. I have seen some conversation about the word not being inclusive. So I'm not at a place where I can discuss that because I'm still engaging with that. So I would say that to the person that answered this question or asked this question, if you have something that you're thinking about, please continue this conversation with me because my thoughts are not fully formed. I understand a little bit what people's issue with it is, and that's where I have to leave it.
Thank you, Catarina. Thank you. And I'm sure the individual, they want to pursue this conversation, will connect with you. So here's another question. What is your recommendation for an app that transcribes conversations?
There are a few. If you have a Google phone or Android, you should have Google's Pixel has Google Live Transcribe, and there's an app in that phone. Not all Android phones have that. You can use another app called Ava, A-V as in victory, A. They are okay. Another one that I like is Otter. Otter like the animal, O-T-T-E-R. Otter is fantastic for so many reasons, but that is one that I think works really well in terms of accuracy. Yeah, so I will look into those, and I hope that helps.
Wow, wow. Here's another one. Anyone, we have 3 minutes. Okay. Policy often refers to special needs because legal departments say this is still the legal term. How can this be addressed?
I think this is a great question. I think that when you have something that you're not able to get out of because we're a legal department, my first thought is there another way that you can address this? Can you put out another statement that communicates your feelings on the term special needs and why it's reflected in a certain policy? Like that might be a way to kind of get around it so that you have the official policy, but then also have your statement. And then you have guidelines that when you're speaking about disability or you're doing communications externally, that you're not going to use that term. Like figure out where those hard boundaries are and create rules for the rest of it is what I would do.
Thank you so much, Catarina. Elijah, is there a question that we need to ask Catarina that I'm missing here? Did I miss a question?
Oh, there's one in the chat and there's a hand up from Sarah who wanted to respond.
Okay.
Sarah, are you there? All right, let me read the question we have queued
Somebody
up.
has to turn on her camera. I'm not sure if she has power to do that.
Okay, so while Elijah is doing that, I want to say, because we have 2 minutes, and if we're not able, there's Sarah. Okay, not a problem. Thank you, Sarah. She wanted to just inform the speaker where she was on Zoom. I want everyone to understand how much I appreciated this presentation today. Catarina, we have to bring you back. You brought so much information in in ways and things that I never thought about. And I'll be the first to admit, I was one of those people. I did not grow up with anyone, and I thought really hard with disabilities that I knew of. And so it wasn't a conversation in my household. And I, you know, I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I really well, I do a lot of interaction with the community that I'm fully aware of. If I know of a community that have disabilities, how do I interact? And there were so many things that came to mind, and I'm being very authentic here. This has really opened my eyes. And I believe that there's some work for me to do. And I can't thank you enough for this presentation. And I'm begging you right here in front of everyone, please, please come back. When we reach out to you, I'm hoping that you will come back, because this was very edifying, very enlightening, and very engaging. So I want to thank all of the questions and comments that came through in the chat box. And Catarina, I want to thank you so very, very much for coming and sharing these wonderful, wonderful ideas and thoughts and this engaging conversation. And what do I say? Thank you. And please come back. And Jane, thank you for being here with us. And all of you, we know that you could have spent your time so many other places, but you chose to come and spend this hour with us. And we want to say thank you and have a fantastic day. And please come back to see us again next month when we have another Learning Cafe. But Catarina will come back. She's on the air hearing everybody's hearing her say that, yes, you'll be back, right?
Thank you so much. I would love to come back in the future. And I just want to thank all of you who shared your experiences, your responses in the chat. This is one of the most engaged groups that I've been a part of. So thank you again.
Thank you. Everybody have a wonderful day.